welcome you. I am Gaia Gamhebage and I work for the World Health Organization. And we are really happy to be here with our panel of experts, with our practitioners, and most important, with all of you to celebrate this important day. So the World Health Organization is responsible for human health, but we understand very acutely how the health of our environments, of animals, and of humans are interlinked, how our health, our lives, our livelihoods are so intermingled. And today is a great opportunity to discuss why zoonosis is so important to all of us, even if you're not an animal health specialist, and what can we do to build the systems and capacities to strengthen this work going forward. And to do that, I've got some great experts, some of them from WHO, but many of them from outside, and people who are practitioners on the ground. So without further ado, I'd like to get started. One of the things I'd ask you to do is feel free to write your comments, write your observations in the chat, and give feedback to the speakers. But if you have a specific question that you want me to consider in the Q&A section, please go to Q&A, right? Go to Q&A and put the question there. So it's much easier for me and my colleagues to look for it, because as you see, your chat is going very, very fast and I can't keep up anymore. So the first question is already there, and I'm going to clarify and say, no, we do not give a certificate for this webinar. And the point is that there is knowledge and peer learning that we need that goes beyond an accredited certificate. But during the webinar, my colleagues will put up links to courses that have certificates in the chat. So keep an eye out for them. Go to our platform and the platforms of our speakers to access more certified learning. So if you're happy to continue, I'd like to start. And I'd like to start with we're going to split today up into 3 small panels so that you get to have a more intimate conversation with 2-3 of our experts at the same time. And I'll explain who the panelists are as we go into the panel. And I'd like to take some questions in the Q&A that I can post to them if it already hasn't been answered. I hope that's okay with you, and I hope that you can understand what I'm saying. All right, so let's start with our first panel. And to start us off, I'd like to invite my colleague, Dr. Bernadette Abella Ritter, who actually works in the center of WHO that deals with this topic of zoonosis. She works in the Department for the Control of Neglected Tropical Diseases in the World Health Organization, and she's a team leader on neglected zoonotic diseases and NTDs that have a human-animal interface. She's closely involved in advancing common areas of work with our partner agencies, with the Food and Agriculture Organization, the Organization for Animal Health. We have an expert from there you'll hear from, and other global health actors. And so Bernadette, this is really your day within WHO to celebrate, so happy Zoonosis Day. To start us off, can you set the scene a little bit? Can you explain what are zoonosis so that we all understand? I'm a human health person, so it'll be useful. And tell us why it's so important to know about zoonotic disease and how they impact our lives and our livelihoods. So over to you, Bernadette.
Thank you very much, Gaia. And this is truly a good opportunity to explain what zoonoses are in the first place. These are infections and diseases that actually infect both humans and animals. They are naturally transmissible between vertebrate animals. They can be bidirectional. It's not just animals giving it to humans, but it can go both ways. And some of these diseases stay, once they infect the human, it's called a dead-end host. We can take a disease like rabies. Rabies is propagated mostly in dogs or wild animals and reaches a human being, but it goes nowhere. Some of the other diseases start off as a zoonosis, but then evolve into an infection where humans transmit it between each other. And then, of course, there are more complex transmission pathways of things like antimicrobial resistance, which belong also within the package of zoonosis, where it goes back and forth. When we look at influenza or even COVID, it goes back and forth between animals. We had the mink story where we saw the variants coming out from the animals and back into the humans. How, so if you broke down how did they impact us? So of course, these diseases often are in subsisting communities. At least in the work that I do, I work on diseases of poverty, the neglected tropical diseases. They are among the disenfranchised of all communities, and these people make a living, live very closely with the animals, and so they share the environment with their animals. There are very easy pathways of transmission. So there will be human health losses where people are getting sick. There also sometimes costs a lot of money to these to get treatment, and it causes catastrophic out-of-pocket expenses that actually increase the spiral of poverty. And then there's a sort of a double burden, and that is the loss from the livelihoods and the the products from animals, the food we can get from animals, and all the other um, all the other benefits we get from animals, transportation, whatever. So there's there's a loss in the human health, but losses in the animal health, and that is quite a double burden, really.
Thank you so much. Actually, some questions are coming up since you have the microphone. I just wanted to, there were some factual questions. Is it true that mammals are the main zoonotic spreader, Bernadette?
Yes, the vertebrate animals, yes, they are well, vertebrate animals, okay? Everything that has a vertebra can transmit. So we have chickens giving us zoonotic diseases as well. So not only mammals, but a large proponent would be mammals. I cannot give you the exact numbers. We have wildlife, and we've got livestock, we've got companion animals, and very large kingdom of animals.
And maybe just people are interested. Somebody has asked, Nirman has asked, is COVID-19 a zoonotic disease? So I'll let you answer that. Yes.
So we know that the source of COVID-19 matches very well with zoonotic sources. Many animals in the wild have coronaviruses. We have coronaviruses and also in our companion animals and livestock. These are very widespread viruses that are out there. But the coronavirus maps very well against viruses coming from the wild. And so the initiation, as I said before, was a zoonotic event, but now it has become a pandemic. But it can easily go back into animals and out again, depending on what type of animal.
That's very important. So many zoonotic diseases start in animals, they jump species to, let's say, to humans, yes. And then there is transmission amongst humans. And if humans get infected for the first time with a new zoonotic disease, we don't have immunity. And that's why a pandemic can arise. So this is actually very, very important concept. So Bernadette, if I just go back to, so this is really interesting, but what are the big challenges to address these zoonosis in a more systematic way?
So I think the world is moving towards finally understanding we need to shift to prevention rather than cure. And to do prevention with zoonotic diseases, we need to work with the other sectors. We need to work with the human health sector, needs to work with the animal health sector, with the food sector, with the environmental sector. So we need to work across the sectors and disciplines. And so it is really important that we, as the global organization for health, works closely with other partnering organizations like the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Organization for Animal Health. And recently, we are now partnering more officially formally on zoonosis and One Health with the United Nations Environmental Programme. And so with that, we already start to build a collaboration across those different spaces, coordinate what we do, prioritize where to do, from research to planning to programming, and support countries to find their way to combat zoonotic diseases in their own context.
So you've talked about some of the work that's been initiated between agencies and across sectors, right? So these agencies represent different sectors as well.
Yes.
Food, environment, animal health, human health, and so on. So what do you think we can do to create more sustainability in these systems that address this kind of double threat? Because you said, people are just beginning to see that they're connected and that we need to do something about it. What in your mind could be one or two things that we could do to further the strengthening of these systems? So
you don't build systems during crisis. Systems usually are built outside the crisis, during sort of the peacetime. If we're looking at zoonotic diseases, we need strong surveillance. Any diseases, be it infectious or non-infectious, but you do need strong surveillance systems. We need strong laboratory systems. If we're looking at programs, we need to work with procurement. We need to be looking at collaborations, building the networks, and all that needs time to grow and to build that platform for interaction across the space, and also to prioritize. We have great tools out there. We have wonderful tools in the animal health sector, in the food safety. So we do have everything we need if we could only not do it in a fragmented way, but really come together in a more organized and systematic way to address diseases. And also one area I would like to bring forward is we are now concerned about an epidemic. And so the epidemic would benefit greatly from those systems that are attending to everyday problems in communities. I work on the diseases, endemic diseases, those diseases that affect communities who the communities care about. If they have brucellosis in their livestock, if they have leptospirosis, or they have tuberculosis or rabies, these are the concerns of communities. This is how we can bring them on board, and then when there is a crisis, we will be able to be better prepared and respond much faster to the crisis. Plus, we're building workforce capacity, which is often built in peacetime, working on the everyday problems in communities, but then are reprogrammed to addressing crisis situations and emergency response. Absolutely, thank you. I mean, having worked in emergencies for so long, emergencies are an opportunity to understand the problems, but we have to build systems well beyond that. And Bernadette, thank you so much for talking not just about these epidemics that come into the news and we worry about, but endemic. And these endemic diseases are diseases that are there all the time. And as you said, often affecting the poorest of the poor. Bernadette, feel free, like all other panelists, to go into the question. There are lots of questions, do fungal pathogens from the soil constitute this? Can you, before you go, just give one example, and several people have asked, where humans are the source of infection and animals get sick. Can you give an example? Well, if we look at antimicrobial resistance, often it can actually go from something that's created at a hospital setting that goes into the animal population. Okay. For example. Great. Feel free to answer some of those questions in writing. Great. I mean, I could keep talking with you all day, but I'm really keen to invite our next speaker, Professor Andrea Winkler. Now, Professor Winkler has many, many titles, and I'm going to just share with you some of them. She is the co-joint director of the Center for Global Health at the Technical University of Munich, co-chair of the Lancet One Health Commission, and she has been leading for almost 20 years research on zoonotic diseases, with a focus, I understand, on pork tapeworm. Tanya Soliam, can you, Professor Winkler, tell us more about your research, the approach you took on zoonosis, and how your research informs a more global perspective for zoonotic diseases?
Well, thanks very much for the invitation, Guy, and of course, Bernadette. It's a pleasure to be to be here today with all of you, and happy Zoonosis Day. So in fact, I shall mention I'm actually a neurologist by training. So I'm a hardcore physician working on the brain. And I actually set out 15, 17 years ago working in Africa as a physician, and then looked after people with epilepsy, being in my training for becoming a neurologist later on. And then I realized the pork tapeworm really plays a role. So it was basically from an on-site experience, and I lived and worked there in sub-Saharan Africa for 3 years. So it was the on-site experience that then led me to wanting to pursue this career in global health with an emphasis on zoonosis for the rest of my life. And I was based at a department of neurology. So basically, very early on already, I needed to convince the people around me that we need to reach out and that we need to work in an interdisciplinary way. And that was a long time before Corona. So I built a team around the pork tapeworm, so which is Taeniosolium cysticercosis, foodborne parasite number 1. Comes also with quite a burden of disease, especially in terms of epilepsy, headache, but also loss of livelihood, etc. And Bernadette has already pointed to this complexity of zoonosis. And then we were lucky enough to get funding from the German government, and then basically we were able to build a large consortium project. And Guy, I would like to come to the second part of the question is, so how can we, when we work on a research project from a biomedical perspective, but we had already broadened that. So we had public health experts. My first postdoc in the Department of Neurology was a veterinarian, which was very unusual. But then lifting all of that to a global level. So basically research is always, I mean, coming from a research institution, it is at the core, but we also launched ourselves in capacity building and then into policy translation. And that was actually by the German funder, by the German Ministry of Education Research. That was a prerequisite. And that was quite good, because then as researchers, we started to think about that translational aspect. And ever since, in the projects that we are running, we start co-creating, co-advancing, and we involve the communities from the very, very beginning, but then put it towards a global level. So we, in every country we work, we look out for the public health institutes, for the larger research institutes, and the liaison with the ministries. And we try to build up from the beginning our context there. And last but not least, we actively sought to participate, and that was of course a bilateral thing, also being approached from the WHO, being part of guideline development processes. And I think that's very important that the WHO departments and the researchers work together and share their knowledge. And of course, by now we have great tools. We can do this through digital tools. And I will stop here, Gaia, because I don't want to be too long. But I think it's the message here for all the researchers that work on site on nitty-gritty research things, which is really important. The methodology and to be honest and work with your methods and your discipline, it is important. But from the beginning, think large and reach out to policy people, to decision makers, and start your translational process very early on in your research process.
Thank you so much. I mean, you're really talking about, going from research to policy, to guidance, to implementation, right? The whole spectrum, and everybody along this chain is very, very important. But as Professor Winkler says, keep your eye on this ecosystem and contribute proactively. So let me move on. And actually, there are lots of questions about One Health, and I thank you panelists who are already writing answers to questions. Feel free to continue. Professor Winkler, you I know have been a great advocate for One Health governance for managing zoonotic diseases. Can you explain what you mean by that, and why is this so important?
Yes, Guy, no, thank you for this question. It is basically one of the most important areas within One Health. I mean, the work on site is majorly important, but the work at a higher level to bring the decision makers together is just as important. And of course, they come from very diverse backgrounds. So I would define One Health governance by maneuvering and moving diplomatically within the One Health space. And that, of course, means to reach out to a variety of stakeholders, from the human, from the animal, but also from the environmental sector. Bring them together at one table and make them realize that it is important to look into the same direction, and that everybody is actually only gaining by collaborating. But of course, we need convincing arguments for stakeholders to come on board. And we do have those arguments. They fall under the broad umbrella of added value of One Health, or the added value of One Health interventions. And I'm sure that some of my co-speakers and co-panelists will actually dwell on this later on. But it is important to make sure that people understand, be they ministers or be they community stakeholders, that there is something there for them if they come to that table. So the added value and what they gain may only be visible in a couple of years or 10 years, decades down the line. And the other argument, of course, now with the pandemic is to build strong surveillance around One Health governance. And again, I will stop here. I could go on forever, but I'm mindful of time.
Thank you. And people have asked about the need for surveillance systems as really an integral part of managing all of these diseases. So that's really good. The third question, and for this round, the final one I want to ask you is about, we have a plan for our planet, the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So we're working through them. We're trying to achieve them by 2030. But of course, it doesn't mention One Health. So can you comment on this? And what are your ideas and thoughts for integrating One Health into the post-2030 agenda? And what are the big challenges and opportunities you see going into the future?
Yeah, thanks again, Guy. Of course, that question we could discuss for a whole day, even for a whole week. But to be short, so you're right. I mean, the SDGs are not explicit on One Health, but implicitly, I mean, One Health is there because we have everything from human health, from the environment, from working together, partnership, from economic growth, from development, education, you name it. It's really not spelled out, but implicitly it is there. For the post-2030 agenda, so after the SDGs, we have been discussing in the Lancet One Health Commission that we've been running now for over 2 years, actually. And that commission took a totally different direction by the pandemic, as you may imagine. So we have been discussing how we should bring One Health out there and hold people accountable. The big question is, do we need One Health metrics? Like in planetary health, you know, something that we can count down towards. Those metrics, they would need to be backed by really good research. The consensus at the moment, or the discussion, goes more into the direction that we don't need another set of indicators. We need to weave in One Health into what we have already. And I just give you a couple of keywords, and then I will stop. So it could be woven into the international health regulations. And there are the first steps already there, and WHO has undertaken the first steps to do that. They could also be woven into the pandemic treaty that has been discussed or is currently being discussed quite prominently within a surveillance, a One Health surveillance system, but also not just for the surveillance system, but also within other areas. And there are other possibilities and opportunities where we could not just tag on One Health, but make it an integral part. That's something that you work towards. And that is currently under discussion. What would be the best way to hold governments and stakeholders accountable to collaborate? Collaboration also means sharing financial resources, and after all, to rebuild our economic approaches and make One Health center of economic development, and of course, financing One Health as an integral part. I'll stop here, and I thank you so much for having me on the panel.
No, thank you. I think it's really good that we're talking about, you know, what we could do to integrate into existing processes, but really thinking future as well. And as you say, it's not excluded from the current agenda. We just have to see where it is. So thank you so much. And as you say, a full webinar should be dedicated to this. Moving on to my colleague, Dr. Stefan de la Roque, who is the team leader for human-animal interface in the WHO Health Security Preparedness Division in the Health Emergencies Program. And I know, Stefan, for many years of knowing you, you're very, very passionate about the need to work together, you know, for addressing this. Tell us in your words, you know, why is this cross-sector, cross-disciplinary collaboration so central to this area of work? And I'll put in another question participants are asking, does WHO have a One Health program?
Thank you, Gaia. Yes, definitively passionate. It's probably the name, but in fact, you know, it comes from what I have seen previously before WHO. I am a vet by education, and I worked with FAO and OI, and also many years in Africa as a researcher. But during my time in FAO, I was deployed for the management of several very severe zoonotic disease. Some of them being hemorrhagic diseases. And my role was to help the country to build a response. And because of the nature of the disease, I had to start to work with WHO. And then it was really impressive to see how difficult it was to organize a response when it was not very well prepared. And we have seen a lot of examples with some good colleagues now in WHO, where we work together, trying to organize a response between the different ministries, different sectors. And, you know, when we are not successful in doing that, the impact is immediately in terms of people dying just because we are not able to coordinate. So that's why I realized that even if I am a vet and I love my work, I probably should try to spend some time in WHO to see if we can improve this collaboration. And in fact, I really believe that, in fact, we have some capacities and some tools to do that. So we are working very hard to clarify how we can help countries to understand the way to coordinate between sectors, how to better understand the roles, the responsibilities of each of the sectors, to identify synergies, opportunities, pooling resources to see how we can together organize the work. But as it has been said previously, this is not something that we do during emergency. So that's why I am in the emergency program, but I am part of preparedness department because that's what we want to do. We want to work in peacetime to organize that. That's why I am so passionate, because I think it has to be done.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And again, thank you, Nigel and Professor Oladele, who's answering questions. So those of you who've written questions, just check answered and you'll see some of the answers there. And my colleague Alejandro has been posting certified courses because some people are asking about avian influenza, about zoonotic origins, you're asking about leptospirosis. So that's all there, free for you to get certificates. There are many questions about the origins of COVID-19, since that's under investigation. I don't think we can comment on it, but Bernadette already talked about what the linkages are very well. So Stefan, continuing with you and building on, you know, what Professor Winkler said about, you know, IHR and the current conventions and laws. So if we take the international health regulations, the global health security agenda, and even the upcoming pandemic treaty. what are the gaps you think, need to be addressed in these global strategies and laws and treaties? And can you tell us, how these gaps may be addressed? Just talk through some of the issues that are really foremost in your mind.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I don't know if we should talk about gaps or maybe opportunities that we see here. Many of these treaty or laws or regulation are focusing on emergencies. And we have been monitoring over the last years the capacity of countries. We have a lot of tools, including through the IHR, to monitor the capacity of countries. So we know more or less the level of performance for health security. But the key message here, one of the key messages here is probably that we should not consider this capacity to be isolated from the rest. And I think that Bernadette already mentioned how it is important to see this capacity in the context of the health system. And now we have to really work on the strengthening of the whole health system. It's not so much that it's important to think about what needs to be developed specifically to respond to this sort of outbreak. It's probably more important to think about what existing resources, including human resources, can be rapidly mobilized and deployed and reassigned to face these emergencies. And I think that currently what we see with COVID is very clear. COVID has clearly demonstrated that even the best health and medical care system have been deeply affected by the pandemic. And it's so important to reorganize immediately the system to be able to answer to the outbreak. So this is my very first point, very strong point. Yeah. It's impossible without strengthening health system, and not only human health system, also veterinary system, to improve our preparedness. That's my first point. And if I may, I have another one. Emergence of zoonotic disease are probably the exception. The major threat is with endemic disease, as it has been said. It's really with endemic disease that the multisectorial, the One Health approach should be operationalized. And here I think that we should be very strategic. We should not miss the opportunity of the momentum where the focus is on One Health, the need for cross-sectorial management of zoonotic outbreak is clearly understood, and we should use that to improve our performance for all sorts of important zoonotic disease. So in the renewed interest on IHR, on the international convention, the new treaty, I mean, all that is very welcome if at the end we can use that to consolidate the whole system.
And thank you. And just to wind up, I've often heard you say, there are driving forces that can really help address this situation. What are some of these forces?
Well, the treaty, the convention, the regulation that we just mentioned definitively should strategically be used here. But we should not underestimate the difficulty to coordinate between sectors. Very often a lot of institutional, administrative problems, difficulty, challenges hamper collaboration between ministries, authorities. Or sometimes there is just legal barriers, or there are also problem of cultural barrier, or problem of competition for resources, and sometimes just behavioral problem of how we behave, what we understand from the others. We organized a lot of these workshops between different sectors. You cannot imagine how often I heard from one sector, oh, by the way, I didn't know that these people were also doing that. Because sometimes we don't use the same words. Sometimes we don't use the same approach. For surveillance, for example, we don't always have the same tool. But at the end of the day, we are doing the same thing. So that's why with FAO, with OIE, with a lot of partners, we really work hard to establish or to create opportunity for these different people to discuss together and to get to realize how similar they are and how they can really organize themselves. We call that bridging workshops. Yeah. We have them in the same room, and then we help them to think about what can be improved, what they can do together, and that's it. That's really important. We have a lot of tools for that. We have a lot of operational tool, guidance material. So it's not the issue. The issue is really to have the people being able to discuss together. And for a longer term perspective, change in behavior, I really believe that that because we work on that together. I really believe that it's probably with the next generation that we will really see that happening. I am really with Andrea when she says, we have to think large. We have to really change the way that we perceive this disease. We really have to be open to the perspective of other sectors. And for that, there's a lot of things to do also in education and training.
You're absolutely right. Look at you and I. One is not just trained, but socialized as a vet or a doctor. So it's very difficult. We don't understand the socialization that goes around our profession, not just the education. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Bernadette, for sort of setting the scene, looking at governance and looking at the future. Now, I see some questions in the chat about, does this really work in the countries? Well, my next panel is really going to talk about what's happening in countries. And to start us off is Dr. Nitesh Debna, who's a vet and a team leader at the Fleming Fund project in Bangladesh. And he's been involved in this One Health work in the country. One Health, he believes, is for every country. So in your country, Dr. Nitesh, how do you approach One Health?
Thank you for having me in this great event, and hello everybody. Happy World Genocide Day. Well, in Bangladesh, we started our One Health journey in 2008, and two important emerging infectious diseases such as Nipah and bird flu or highly pathogenic avian influenza have been the inspiration for introducing One Health. And it has developed organically. What I mean by organically, the power and energy coming from the awareness of a very visionary group of professional people working across human health, animal health, environmental health, and across these things. Basically, in 2007, from Chittagong Veterinary and Animal Science University, we started a formal and informal discussion how we can work at the interface of this emerging infectious disease. And that led to a sort of conference in 2008, March. It's a multidisciplinary conference, participants from 14 different organizations. And that was a milestone for our One Health journey. And that time we adopted a One Health Chittagong Declaration, and we launched a civil society multidisciplinary membership-based organization, what we call One Health Bangladesh. That is the milestone, the first milestone of our One Health journey. And the second one, this conference was also very meaningful in the sense that it's a government, non-government, different stakeholders attended, including the Director General from Health Service as well as from Veterinary Service. And that, set different goals. But in summary, I also want to mention that from that one, in 2012, we developed a One Health strategy document. And that outlined the One Health governance along with other things. It had 9 components. And in 2016, under that governance system, we developed a One Health Secretariat. By the way, that One Health strategic framework that we developed in 2012, it was approved by 3 ministries: Ministry of Health, Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock, Ministry of Forestry and Environment. And these 2 forums, One Health Bangladesh, which is a sort of civil society forum professionally, but it has an open access from all corners, government, non-government, and One Health Secretariat, which was established as a part of the governance and the One Health coordination mechanism. It was established in 2016. And before 2016, One Health, in partnership with different organization development partner, One Health activities were going on. And then One Health Bangladesh and One Health Secretariat, they were working together hand in hand, and 2 different approaches. One, the One Health Bangladesh led a movement, what we call a whole of a society approach for One Health, and One Health Secretariat started a whole of a government secretariat. And with these two platforms, organized many activities, including One Health conferences. And so far, we have organized 10 One Health conferences where all across the professions and activists attend that conference. The last conference we had in 2019, and Honorable Minister for Health presided over that one, and Minister for Agriculture was the chief guest, and Deputy State Minister for Environment and Forestry was another special guest for that one. And that is how One Health evolved. As I said, it was not driven by a donor nor by government initially, but government came up at the later stage. So over that, still.
Very interesting story, really not necessarily driven by government. You started bringing people together, conferences, had a strategic framework, went with civil society, had a secretariat. So really, really interesting. You don't necessarily need government to intervene, but professionals can intervene as well. You spoke about civil society. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you think is the role of civil society in One Health?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. That's a very important question. We have two groups of, you can say, non-traditional, traditional stakeholders. And normally when you call traditional, we understand that veterinarians, public health experts, physicians, animal production specialists, agriculture, they are the natural, stakeholders. And normally they deal with the technical problems, including, joint outbreak investigation, surveillance, disease control, research, capacity building. These are the technical areas that is being looked after by technical people and very traditional. But there is another group of people, what we call the non-traditional partners. That includes, say, for example, we have a very strong environmental movement in Bangladesh. In Bengali, we call Bangladesh Poribesh Andolon, or BAPA. And there is a center we call Bangladesh Center for Communication Programs. We have a BRAC, NGO. We have animal welfare organization and media people. They were also actively engaged in this pathway of One Health movement. And the latest, I don't know whether you'll tell it traditional or the non-traditional. Our Honorable Prime Minister is now the co-chair of One Health Global Leaders Group on AMR. And we consider it the greatest inspiration for us for running the One Health movement and also implementing One Health activities within the government. And we have also one other front, what we call One Health Young Boys. And that is mostly organized by students, young professionals from across different disciplines and sectors. And their role is to create awareness, influencing the policy, advocacy, activism, communication to change behavior, promoting community engagement. These sort of activities, although these, the other traditional partners are not excluded from that, they are also actively engaged. But this particular group of people are very actively engaged in those sort of awareness building policy issues and community engagement. Thank you.
Yeah, so great. I mean, usually we think of a One Health concept and a program being implemented, but you're talking about a One Health movement in which governments and structures have become integrated. Is there any particular structure, just as a final question, that you're very proud of that you created as part of this process?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a very important question also for us. As I mentioned earlier, the second milestone of our journey was to develop a sort of strategic framework for One Health. And that has outlined the One Health governance. Out of 9 components, we have one component that is One Health governance. And it has developed a system, outlined a system, a 3-tier coordination mechanism. One is the interministerial level, what you call steering committee. Another one is the agency level, interagency level, that is known to be One Health Technical Advisory Committee. And the last one, as I mentioned earlier, the One Health Secretariat, which is the most functional one. They do the day-to-day activities, connecting in the outbreak investigation, conducting joint surveillance, engaging different and networking with different partners. And this is one thing. Second, also, there are other organizations like academia, research organizations. They are also undertaking a lot of activities like One Health research, also One Health training program, capacity building. These are the activities going on under those structures. And that networking is being done. And importantly, one important milestone is that, the government of Bangladesh under the Ministry of Health, they provided also a budgetary provision for these One Health activities under One Health. And it is also, as I these activities, these two platforms work. And importantly, Bangladesh is a very important country for One Health. It is a small country, as you know, with the highest density of population, maybe also highest density of population, animal population. And environment is also very vulnerable. So interdependence and interconnected is very visible. And that's why we call our future for better life is dependent on One Health practice.
Thank you. You should be very proud. What an interesting and inspiring story. Thank you. Next, we move to Ethiopia. Our next speaker is calling from Addis Ababa. Dr. Vesinau Adunya is a livestock program manager with VSF Swiss Ethiopia country office. And he works in pastoral settings. So slightly different from the crowded, dense sort of and challenged environment that we talked about before. And he really focuses on understanding the understanding of communities that he works with on zoonotic diseases. So welcome, and Dr. Adunya, can you tell us why zoonotic diseases are very important in this context? And what are the needs and the risks of the pastoral communities that you work with?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gaia, for having me on this webinar to reflect my opinion on zoonosis from pastoralist area perspective. To answer your question, yes, zoonosis is important because developing countries such as my country, Ethiopia, since the economy of the country is largely dependent on agriculture, there is a high vulnerability of the effect of zoonotic disease. In Ethiopia, substantial proportion of livestock resources they belong to and located in pastoralist settings. And for this pastoralist community, livestock are the basis for their life and livelihood, meaning they are the source of food and nutrition, they are the source of cash or income and so on. So because of this, in the day-to-day life of the pastoralist community, vast majority of pastoralist people have a direct contact with their animals, creating opportunity for infection and spread of disease. On the other hand, when we see the disease situation in the country, Ethiopia has the second highest burden of zoonotic disease in Africa. And in the year 2015, CDC, through the Global Health Security Agenda, supported the Ethiopian government in prioritizing zoonotic disease. And diseases such as rabies, echinococcosis, anthrax, brucellosis, and leptospirosis were found and prioritized as the 5 top zoonotic diseases in the country. So when we see the disease situation and its impact on pastoralist community, we can summarize the impact in 3 categories. First, it threatens the health of animals, resulting in loss of production and productivity, less market value, and finally death. The second one, it affects the livelihood of the large segment of the population who depend on livestock as a major source of food and income. And third, it causes a large number of illness and deaths in people, which is associated with significant economic and social loss. And when we see the risk factors in this community, on the pastoralist community, unlike other segments of the community, there are various risk factors associated with their way of life, culture, behavior, and habits. As it is already displayed on the screen. For instance, living in proximity to animals is one of the risk factors which exposes the community for zoonosis. There is also raw milk consumption behavior, which is very common in all pastoral areas of our country. And there is also some practices like handling of sick animal and animal products with bare hand, which again expose or puts the community at risk. There are also exercises during the management and husbandry of livestock, like assisting labor and handling of aborted fetus without hand protected by especially the pastoralist community. And also, as it is already displayed on the picture, disposing of carcass of dead animals in and around villages in open space and near water structure is also the other risk factor which puts the community at risk of zoonosis. Above all, there is also a routine and periodic migration of communities during drought time and during different seasons, which puts the pastoralists at periodic risk of infection, especially when the pastoralists congregate around water points. And these are some of the factors that exacerbate the vulnerability or increase the risk of the community for zoonosis. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And if there are a few other photos that our speaker wanted to share, please go ahead and share them. So this is about drinking raw milk and the risk there. As you can see, these images about roadside retailing of raw meat, raw milk. Great, thank you. And thank you for sharing that with us to take us to where you work and really talk about risks. And, you know, identifying risk and managing risk is also a really important way in health. So thank you. So what are the challenges that you have in this context to control zoonotic diseases in pastoral communities? Can you share some concrete examples and tell us, and there are many questions about how you engage and train and educate the stakeholders that you are working with.
Okay, thank you. Again, I can say in developing countries in general and in pastoral settings in particular, there are various factors which makes the control effort challenging. The first one is the low level of awareness about zoonosis posed by the community and also health practitioners working in that specific pastoralist settings and areas. The other one is lack of diagnostic and therapeutic facilities for zoonotic disease, especially in hard to reach and remote areas of pastoralist areas. There is also poor and regular disease reporting and surveillance exercised in these remote areas of the country, which is also a challenge. And also, when we see the public service provision by the government and also development partners, there is lack of focus to prioritize zoonosis by both human and animal health sectors. There is also difficulty to materialize the recommendation. For example, there is no compensation mechanism for culling of a certain animal positive for certain zoonotic disease. That will somehow directly impact the livelihood of the pastoralist community. So these are some of the challenges. And when you see, as an example, for example, when we see milk in pastoralist community, milk and milk products are often regarded as precious products. And there is a saying by Somali pastoralist community in Ethiopia to value the holiness of milk. It says, except milk, the rest food is raw. This perception by itself promotes the raw consumption of milk, especially milk originated from camels, which is very potential for transmission of a number of zoonotic diseases from infected animals. So there is also in these areas, boiling of milk or heat treating of milk is considered as a taboo, which directly contributes to the transmission of zoonotic diseases through milk. To mention some of our experience on engaging the community or to improve the engagement of the community on zoonosis, As Swiss, we use different grassroots community structures and learning platforms. For example, the community animal health worker system and also the pastoral field schools as a learning platform and as an entry point to the community to cascade the knowledge and the awareness on the community on this zoonosis and in our different projects. Thank you.
No, so Dr. Adunia, it sounds like a really complex situation, you know, in the one hand, lack of information, lack of resources, lack of services, and also these very strong held cultural religious beliefs, right? So is there anything, you know, you've got hands-on experience, you're working with these communities every day, you know, what do you think needs to be addressed most urgently for managing zoonosis in pastoralist context?
Thank you, Guy. And again, to address zoonosis, I think, especially for the pastoralist context, we have to understand the dynamics in the pastoral environment. As it is always said, pastoralists are one of the most researched and yet the least understood group in the world. So in my opinion, the following are some of the key actions that can be executed to address zoonosis. The first one is we have to enhance the livelihood status of the pastoralist community because this is one of the grassroots challenge, or food insecurity is the ground problem which the community is suffering from. So we have to address this issue. The second one is we have to enhance the pastoral community participation and awareness creation through organizing different learning sessions and platforms. The other one is we can also do mainstreaming of zoonosis in programs and projects of government, NGOs, and civic society organization in the way we do it for gender and climate change. This somehow will help us to address and respond to the issue.
It's a very
and also I recommend donors must prioritize zoonosis in their funding requirement due to the fact that these diseases affect both humans, animals, and also the livelihood of the community. Yeah, thank you.
That's really interesting because at the field level, in the community level, you're really talking about the concepts that we heard in the first panel, right? Multidiscipline, intersectorial, integrating in existing programs. So really you're putting into practice and you're confirming this approach that was talked about is really important. Thank you so much. And it's a really interesting idea. Why don't we integrate this the way we integrate gender into everything? So thank you so much, Doctor. And to join this panel, we actually have, we're very happy to have Nigel Swift from the private sector, because actually when we thought about the private sector engagement, we really thought about the impact they have in countries and communities. So Nigel, you're the head of global veterinary public health at Boehringer Ingelheim Animal Health located in Lyon, France. So really welcome. People have talked about non-traditional partners, but you are actually a strong partner and your sector is a strong partner. Tell the participants, how, in your eyes, does the private sector contribute to the prevention and management of zoonotic disease? And what role does your own organization play in this very important field?
Thank you, Gaia. And thank you to everyone for joining and WHO for putting this on. It's a great event. As a veterinarian, this is an important topic to me. In the framework of One Health, prevention and management of zoonotic disease is in everybody's interests. And for the private sector, it's about research, development, commercialization, and education around antiparasitics, viruses, vaccines, and therapeutics for zoonoses. And often there are public-private partnerships, which I think are in everybody's interests. For my organization in particular, we focus on prevention through development of new antiparasitics for a broad range of endoparasites, and vaccines for zoonotic disease, including rabies for domestic animals, for wildlife, avian influenza, leptospirosis. We are a big provider of animal vaccine banks for international governments, and we partner with academic institutes, national labs, and international organizations to monitor epidemiology, update vaccine strains, and plan disease control and outbreak response. So we invest in surveillance. We just set up a partnership with LifeBit, which is an AI surveillance company. We recently invested in a chair and master's program in veterinary public health at the University of Lyon. And then we partner with local vaccine producers in developing countries to share the value chain and increase local capacity. So there's a sort of fairly broad areas of where we play.
Thank you so much. And I should have called you Dr. Nigel. I'm very sorry.
Right. Nigel to my mother.
That's right. So, I mean, people often talk about, market failures being a challenge to this area of work. So what do you think can be done to encourage investments in prevention to address these market failures?
It's a great question because it's a challenge for many. I think there are three main areas that would encourage investment. The first would be public-private partnerships to share the risk of investment if a business case is unclear. An example being our collaboration with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for a new trypanoside, or sometimes for vaccines, for example, guaranteed purchase agreements. Secondly, regulatory assistance, regulatory agencies working together in a region to streamline registration requirements would make market access more attractive to a region. And then thirdly, Nagoya, establishing simple, equitable mechanisms for access to new strains and sequences in line with the Nagoya protocol. I think those three would go a long way.
So again, there's a lot of technical and governance issues
right.
embedded in your answer. So I'm not going to go into all of them. People often complain that there isn't enough investment, particularly, say for parasitic diseases, right? Or easily manageable zoonotic diseases
right.
from the private sector. What do you think is stopping more investment in this area?
I think it comes back to those points. I think an uncertain business case where you say, we're not sure there's going to be a market that will pay back the investment. For example, while the need for a new solution may be clear, there may be uncertainty about whether there's going to be a payback on an investment. A new trypanoside is costly to develop to the current regulatory and environmental standards, and payback in developing countries may not justify that investment. And so they're sharing the investment upfront may be enough to say, okay, we don't need to sell this at as high a price because we're not recouping as much investment. Or, in East Africa, there's a mutual recognition program, a process now for vaccine registration across Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. So initially, it may be that just going for a Uganda market may not be enough to justify your investment. But when you have 3 or 4 countries that are going to recognize your registration, you get there. And that's, unfortunately, we see this going in the other direction. There's increasing protectionism for local companies, which I think at some level, we need to find the right balance of developing local players and bringing innovation and encouraging innovation from outside. And I think that's something that we've tried to do in a few areas. Gaia, you're muted.
Excuse me. Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge Nigel, and we have a speaker I'm going to introduce later for a tremendous answering of questions. So a lot of technical answers as well from Nigel. Thank you. That's really appreciated. So let me be hard on you. Private sector, we're a public sector organization.
A big bad pharma company.
Let me give you a hard question. So there is, and I've heard this. It isn't just out there. I myself have heard, and I've previously believed this, right? That profit-making institutions, make resources need for zoonotic diseases unaffordable, right? Basically that you're charging too much, and that countries who really need it can't afford it. What would you really say to that? And can you share an example of where the industry or your company has done something to make a product more affordable?
Gaia, it is a real challenge. There are examples out there of really ugly overcharging. I would say, we as a company, I don't want to claim that we're perfect. We do strive to make products accessible and affordable, while at the same time paying a lot of attention to quality. As a private business, we're trying to get the right balance of a reasonable return on investment while delivering something of benefit to humanity. At the end of the day, if people can't afford the product we make, nobody wins. And so there is a balance to be found. I would say we've got a couple of examples that I'd like to share where a long-term approach of where we're looking to invest in building a partnership makes a difference. For a product such as rabies vaccines, we're not the cheapest, but I would say we're really competitive with any other product manufactured to European standards. And so we bid competitively in the OIE and the international tenders. But at the same time, we're investing in capacity to support mass dog vaccination campaigns and working with partners to monitor the effectiveness of reduction of human rabies cases. So we're trying to take a holistic view of it. Likewise, for vaccines against foot and mouth disease, we've established some industrial partnerships in developing countries, in Botswana, in Vietnam, where we share the value chain. We say, look, if we produce in Europe, we can't make something affordable to sub-Saharan Africa. So we've developed a technology sharing arrangement with the Botswana Vaccine Institute. They produce locally our product at a lower cost. And I think there's a win-win there. There's a technology sharing, of course, we get royalties from it, but we're developing a local champion, increasing capacity, and therefore I would say both parties win by growing the market. And that's really how we're looking to develop this space.
So thank you. And I hear a focus on, quality, competitive at quality, but also taking a longer term perspective allows things to be more affordable and more accessible.
Right. And again, hats off to the partners we've found, like BMGF, who really have worked with us on some of these solutions. We really appreciate it.
Fantastic, thank you. And again, well done. You're top answerer of questions. So you're right up there. I think you're number 2. So well done. And please stay on.
I'm not monopolizing. I love the topic.
No, it's amazing. I think the interest and the questions people are asking shows a genuine interest and a wide a range of interest, but also wide range of knowledge and concerns as well. So thank you so much for helping out.
Thank you.
If I move to the last panel now, we're going to bring it all together and really look at a couple of aspects. Obviously, capacity building in this area, system strengthening, is very complex. You've heard from the governance panel and the future panel and the country panel, how everything must come together. Disciplines, sectors, levels, international and sub-levels within the country, all the way to the pastoral communities or rural communities in countries. So now bringing it all together, let's just look at a couple of aspects. So to start this capacity building and sustaining capacities conversation, I'm really pleased to welcome Barbara Alessandrini. I've got to know her through, she works with the Animal Health Organization based in Paris, OIE. She really is doing a great deal to strengthen how capacities are built in her domain in animal health, but really contributing and pulling partners like WHO in to make sure that people who are going to work together are going to be trained together as well. So I really have a great professional relationship and respect for Barbara. So Barbara, you're currently the head of capacity building at the OIE. I really wanted you to start with, what is the big challenge as an organization that you found to build capacity in this zoonosis domain?
Thank you very much, Gaia. Good day to all of you, whatever the time is in your country. I have two questions to this answer, two answers to this question. One is more rational, the other one is more instinctive and also based on some of the comments that I have read in the question and answer space. Let me say that the big challenge for an organization, for a single organization, is to set a learning environment where professionals from different disciplines and different worlds that have worked separately until now have to learn together. And I'm not only thinking at a training setting, I'm thinking also at capacity building settings and environments. So This is one of the most important reasons why the OIE works with its partners like WHO and FAO, and now also UNEP, to develop joint programs, joint tools that have a very big challenge in front of them, because they have to support a cultural change, but at the same time provide technical and operational tools to develop the One Health approach. So there are concrete tools like the national bridging workshops that Stefan has mentioned before that help human and veterinary services to address the One Health collaboration and define a sustainable joint roadmap. There are also tripartite tools like the tripartite zoonosis guide and the systems, that operational tools developed like the joint risk assessment tool to assess the risk for the human, animal, and environment interface. There is also a very, very new program that OIE, WHO, and FAO are developing jointly, which is aiming at defining for the first time the One Health competencies for field epidemiologists. This is an ongoing project, and we will have soon this One Health competencies for field epidemiologists that can be addressed through FETP programs or any other continuing education program. But when I saw these comments in the chat saying that we don't see close collaboration between WHO and OIE, or what are FAO and OIE doing to mitigate the risk for zoonosis, I think that I have probably another answer, which is that we probably need to advocate and we need to insist more, because the impact of our work is increased at country level, because what we need to do is to maximize the implementation of what we develop. So for me, that is a big challenge, and also to measure the impact of what we do. And this is what I want to share with you today.
Great. So you mentioned competency-based training, and actually your organization has pioneered this. I think you're moving quite far ahead. So tell a little bit about how you're implementing a competency-based approach a little bit more. And what do you think is the impact of this?
Again, capacity building is not only training, but it is also support to countries with programs that OIE has developed, like the Performance of Veterinary Services program. We have identified in our evaluation tools 45 critical institutional competencies for veterinary services. They go around for different components like resources, human and technical resources, technical authority and capability, interaction with stakeholders, and access to market. You know, the OIE training platform is not really a training school, broadly speaking, but it is a platform that has to facilitate and support the implementation of the OIE standards at country level. So from this setting for veterinary services, we have developed a competency-based training framework that organizes the OIE knowledge around about 15 different competency-based packages. And for each of them, what we're doing is defining the institutional competencies, the individual competencies for different levels of expertise and for delegates, of course, and then go up to the learning outcome. Right. In this way, we are developing a catalog of e-learning, but in the future, hopefully back to face-to-face experiences as well, learner-centered, that at the same time, that must impact on countries, on institutions, hoping that institutions will design national training plans in which our resources are used and incorporated into continuing education programs. But also what we want to do is to allow professionals to build their own portfolios of competencies. And there's a lot, and there will be a lot on One Health.
Right. So I also alluded to the partnership we have for capacity development, but you're working with several organizations, you know, trying to do joint capacity development. You know, what's the approach you're taking, and what are the big opportunities, very briefly, that you see in this area of joint capacity development?
I cannot avoid to mention the partnership with WHO and OIE. based on the fact that the WHO Academy, which is it will open its doors in 2023, and the OI training platform are both based in Lyon, and we have started a preparatory work to be ready to collaborate. What we would like to do is just to build lifelong learning opportunities on the One Health, under the One Health umbrella. We have a very ambitious objective because we want to address transformative change. But I think that we will start working with a very simple and traditional approach, that is targeting audiences, assessing the learning needs, defining the One Health competencies, and delivering learner-centered opportunity, not only through training programs, but also insisting on the importance of building a One Health community of learners, hoping that communities will raise and that they will become stable networks around the different topics and the different domain One Health is organized. The opportunities, I want to start from the fact that COVID has allowed us to identify the vulnerabilities of the One Health resilience. This is an important point to start from. And today, One Health is in the agenda of a global agenda, G7, G20, WHO and countries committed to work on a treaty to build resilience around One Health. This is a great opportunity. The momentum is now, and the great opportunity is that we need to advocate for capacity building at any level. We need to advocate with donors, with partners, with countries, with institutions, with people, that we need to address this change, and we need to work to build concrete capacities and become more effective in the future.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Then I speak to our most helpful speaker. I must say, Professor Oladele, you have been very active on the chat. I think you're the #1 responder. Thank you to all the speakers. But you can see how much interest there is. So, Professor, you are from the University of California, Irvine, which I actually physically know, and presidential chair working in the domain of population health and disease prevention. And you really are an expert in capacity building. How do we assure the development of a well-empowered and trained zoonosis and One Health workforce?
Thank you, Gaia, and thank you to all the panelists for the questions from the audience. It's really delightful for me to be able to contribute in a little way. I think that there are gaps in how we do education workforce training, and those gaps align with the 3 major opportunities that we have to really do well. One is at the university level and colleges, where we train most of the health professionals, and this includes the doctors, the vets, the public health, nurses, pharmacists. In most cases, this training occurs in siloed schools and departments, and interprofessional training is just beginning to become a requirement. Without that, we will not be able to get zoonotic diseases recognized by doctors who see patients and are not able to diagnose infections that come from animals well. The second opportunity that we have to fill gaps is in the workforce itself. So typically the education that universities provide is incomplete. So we require internships and residency trainings where people learn on the job. But it's an ongoing process. So we need to fill the gaps in continuing professional development when people are trained to work together collaboratively in the ministries, in the research centers, and also in communities. The community health education part is the third opportunity that we have. And that is the most underappreciated, and we have not invested well. Many of the questions in the Q&A have to do with how people live their lives in daily basis, encountering animals, and pathogens, and the knowledge, the local knowledge that we have to manage such exposures and infections. And I think we haven't brought that into the One Health framework as much as we could. So the One Health framework, as we've heard, over the last 20 years has been trying to bridge these gaps through interprofessional projects and collaboration, engaging the current workforce through continuing professional development. And all of those activities linked very tightly to field experiences, simulation of outbreaks and spillover events, so that we can really understand how the pathogens evolve in the animal populations, how the human pathogens evolve within human populations, and when they intersect, where those risks may be. And then the human behavior aspects of working with animals, working in agriculture, or even domestic pets could be an opportunity for us to really bridge those educational gaps and really produce competent workforce, aligning with the competency framework that Barbara mentioned earlier.
Professor, yeah, I mean, I'm also really interested in this competency-based learning. I mean, we are basically moving towards continuous or lifelong learning, and competency-based learning is being acknowledged more and more as important. How does this play out in the area of zoonosis and One Health, and what's your approach to it?
Yeah, competency-based learning is a performance-based learning in 3 dimensions. The delivery of the training, meaning professors like myself have to understand that there's a different way of delivering that kind of competency-based learning. We've all had a shift in our mentality as we taught by Zoom all year long, right? And so we have to relearn how to deliver that kind of practical training, performance. And then in the learning process, providing opportunities for trainees to actually demonstrate and to work together during that learning process, so that they don't encounter one another when there's a crisis, right? There has to be that preparation. And then in the assessment, how do we know that somebody already is competent, and we can appoint them to positions of decision-making before they encounter a situation where they have to know exactly what to do. So we're, the USAID funded project that I'm working on is investing in 100 universities in Africa, Africa One Health University Network, and Southeast Asia University Network, or SEOHUN, to really work with faculty members and the leaders of those schools, veterinary medicine, human medicine, nursing, pharmacy, public health, really to embed this this triumvirate of the learner, the delivery of the education, and the assessment process in a One Health framework. But that's the only way that we can really make sure that the workforce that we produce are competent and ready to enter the workforce without that long lag phase of internship.
You've already answered so many questions, so I'm going to just throw you a curveball and say,
okay.
To say, I mean, think of 20 years in the future. You know, we're into the future. We're in this technological age. We're connected. You know, what is your vision of the future for this area?
That is, yeah, I see it. You know, I used to imagine that if an alien comes to Earth and they look at the large population growth and the trajectory, we're a very successful species. But that success also has dangers and risks. And pathogens have always been the biggest risk factor that humans face. I'm a microbiologist by training, and I studied valley fever, which is a soil fungus, as a One Health case study. And I know that climate change is expanding the vulnerability of populations. The zone of infection is increasing. So we need to be able to catch up and address this problem from multiple angles. I think when I see questions about climate change and zoonotic diseases, yes, they're linked. And our future really needs to, the future starts now, right? It's like we can't wait to think, well, are these things linked? They are linked because it's a closed system. And so I see us both in the education and in the research, but more importantly, in the implementation, the translation of our knowledge to an outcome that we all desire in the future. We have to start building on our successes now and recognizing where we failed so that we can bridge those gaps and eliminate. Failure is not an option. It's my motto for the future.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take that as your take-home message for today.
Yes, it is my take-home message.
So let's give an opportunity for others also. What is your message on World Zoonosis Day? Barbara, what is your message?
You're muted.
Am I? No, now.
Yes, Barbara, we're going to go very quickly. We're nearly at time. So Barbara, what's your take-home message?
My take-home message is that we need to work for a long-term sustainability of capacity building programs. We need to consider that capacity building implies assessment, evaluation, commitment to improve starting from numbers. And if we can demonstrate that we build capacity building on robust methodologies, countries may advocate for further opportunities for funding, for sustainable growth objectives.
Great, thank you. What about you, Nigel? What do you want us to remember today?
Well, I would say, animals provide incredible benefits. We need to reduce the opportunities for infections to develop and spread. And the best thing we can do is to raise animals and people in good health and sustainable systems where we are more disease resistant. Animals and people with low nutrition, poor health, overcrowding and stress will be more susceptible. And so let's think about those simple things when we look at the way we live our own lives and raise animals.
Absolutely, thank you. Dr. Adunya?
Thank you, Gaia. My message is, as we have already said, since controlling of zoonotic disease at human level requires a huge investment, especially for Africa or developing countries, it is better to prevent the disease before its occurrence using community-based and grassroots professionals awareness creation, focusing on controlling the origin, source, and vehicle of disease transmission.
Great.
Thank you.
Dr. Nitesh, what are you asking us to take away?
Thank you. My message will be that, we define also One Health, harnessing the capacity. And, the compact I've already talked about, it has to be solved through, and One Health is the way forward. I have to harness the creative power of diversity. That is what is my message.
Great, what a great message. Great. Stefan, what about you?
Well, probably my message will be that obviously these days we focus a lot on some very visible zoonotic diseases, but there are many others. And it's not only happening in the jungle, it's happening in all sorts of ecosystems. And these ecosystems are changing very fast, including because of us. So for me, it's definitively fascinating to work on zoonotic diseases. But I also believe that I will continue to work on that for quite a long time because it's not disease of the past. It's also disease happening now and in the future.
Great, thank you. Professor Winkler.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. I would say take-home message is that we need a systems change, an overhaul, and we need to put One Health right at its center, be it for the economy, for knowledge generation and translation, for governance, for community engagement, you name it. But the whole system the systems thinking needs to change, and One Health needs to be right there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bernadette, you get the last word.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I think there's a building enthusiasm. We need to mobilize this commitment towards action. We need to maximize our gains, both in the human health sector, animal sector, environmental, come together, build those core capacities that are so needed in order for us to be prepared. And of course, have a special focus on local capacities. That is where it is urgently needed.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Bernadette. Thank you, all the panelists. What a lot of work you have done. And thank you for coming with your own perspectives. But we heard a common message emerging through this webinar. Thank you to the 800 or so participants who were live. And I understand there were more on YouTube. The link will be available afterwards. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day. Let's not limit our focus on zoonosis only to this day, but I understand this is we choose this day to commemorate the first successful vaccination against rabies on 6 July 1885 by Louis Pasteur, no less. So it's a day worth remembering. Thank you for letting me be your host. I've learned a lot. I hope to see you in another #LearningSavesLives webinar. Take care and apologies.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great program.
So Gloria, and I think we can end the webinar, stop the recording, and we'll catch up later to do brief. Thank you very much. And Stefan, I hope you're happy.